The most influential outer god, the greater will, was not the first to exert its influence on the lands between, with several others predating its arrival and shaping the primordial world. Long before the Erdtree cast its golden light across the realm, before Marika ascended to godhood, before the very concept of order as we understand it took root in the soil of reality, the lands between existed as a churning cauldron of primal forces, each vying for dominion over the fabric of existence itself. These entities, incomprehensible and vast beyond mortal reckoning, reached down from the spaces between stars, from dimensions folded within dimensions, from the outer dark where thought and matter blur into something altogether alien. They did not come as conquerors with armies and banners, but as whispers in the void, as gravitational pulls on the soul, as infections of ideology that spread through blood and faith and the very laws of nature. Each outer god brought with it a vision of what the world should be, a fundamental restructuring of reality according to its own inscrutable design. The formless mother bathed the primordial landscape in blood and ecstasy, teaching the first beings that suffering and communion were one and the same. The fell god of the giants commanded flame that could burn away the very concept of permanence, a fire that did not merely consume, but negated, reducing all it touched to a state before existence. The outer god of rot whispered of inevitable decay, of the beauty in decomposition, of life feeding on death, feeding on life in an eternal scarlet bloom that would one day consume all things. The frenzied flame, perhaps oldest of all, perhaps youngest, perhaps existing outside time entirely, carried within it the solution to all suffering through the annihilation of distinction itself, the melting of all things back into the primordial chaos from which they emerged. The forces aligned with the dark moon and the cosmos beyond brought cold logic and fate written in the movements of celestial bodies, a determinism as pitiless as the void between stars. The twin bird presided over the boundary between life and death, that gossamer membrane through which all souls must pass, and in its domain the dead did not rest easy but lingered, transformed, became something neither living nor gone. These were not mere deities in the sense that mortals built temples and offered prayers, though temples were built and prayers were offered. These were fundamental aspects of reality given terrible consciousness, patterns in the universe that had learned to want, to hunger, to scheme. And into this roiling primordial soup of competing cosmic visions came the greater will, arriving not first, but arriving with purpose, with a plan for order that would reshape everything that came before. Its golden light did not extinguish the influence of those earlier powers, but rather suppressed them, buried them, wove them into a new tapestry, where they became the dark threads that made the golden pattern visible by contrast. The history of the lands between is not the story of one god's dominion, but of a cosmic struggle that spans eons, a war fought not with swords, but with the very building blocks of existence, where every victory is temporary, and every defeated power waits in the spaces between for its moment to surge back into relevance. The shadow of the Erdtree, that realm hidden away and forgotten, preserved within its boundaries the evidence of these ancient conflicts, the remnants of powers that refused to be fully erased, the scars left on reality by forces too fundamental to ever truly die. In its hidden valleys and forgotten temples, in the blood-soaked rituals of ancient cults and the architecture of civilizations ground to dust beneath the wheel of ages, the truth persists. Each outer god left its mark, not just on the land, but on the people, on the very souls of those who would come to inhabit this world, embedding within them the capacity for faith in powers beyond comprehension, the susceptibility to cosmic influence that would make them forever pawns in games played across dimensions. The tarnished who walk these lands today, seeking shards of the Elden Ring and the power to reshape the world, do so in the shadow of these ancient entities, whether they know it or not. Every incantation whispered, every spell cast, every covenant sworn draws on wells of power dug deep into the bedrock of reality by these outer gods in ages past. The very magic that flows through the lands between is not neutral energy, but the residue of divine intention, colored by the nature of the entities that first taught mortals to reach beyond the veil. To wield the power of blood is to touch the formless mother. To embrace rot is to serve the scarlet goddess, whether you intend to or not. To call upon flame is to invoke powers that predate civilization itself. And the greater will, for all its golden majesty and its Erdtree reaching toward the heavens, is simply the most successful of these cosmic colonizers, the one that managed to impose its vision most completely, but not so completely that the others were erased. They wait, these older and perhaps more primal forces, in the cracks of the Golden Order, in the spaces where Marika's law grows thin, in the hearts of those who suffer and rage and despair beneath the weight of a world that was never meant to hold so many competing visions of existence. The Shadow Realm revealed what scholars and heretics had long suspected, that the history written by the victors, by the Golden Order and its champions, was incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. Beneath the official chronology of ages and epochs lay a deeper, stranger story, one where the lines between God and force of nature blur, where worship and infection become indistinguishable, where the very act of believing in something gives it power over you in ways both subtle and profound. The outer gods do not love their followers in any sense that mortal hearts would recognize as love. They use them, shape them, consume them, transform them into instruments of their will, and the greatest trick they ever played was convincing mortals that this was divinity, that this was transcendence, that this was anything other than cosmic predation dressed in the language of faith. Yet for all their power, for all their influence across ages and civilizations, these outer gods are not omnipotent. They compete, they struggle, they win and lose ground in an eternal contest whose rules, if rules exist at all, remain beyond mortal comprehension. The Greater Will's Golden Order held sway for an age, but ages end, and in their ending the suppressed powers surge back, reclaiming what was taken, reasserting their claim on reality. The shattering of the Elden Ring was not merely a political catastrophe or a failure of Marika's will, but a cosmic event that weakened the barriers between the dominant order and the hungry chaos waiting beyond it. In that moment of fracture, the other in the ancient era, long before the rise of the Golden Order and the Erdtree's dominion, the cosmos of Elden Ring was a place of profound mystery and primal forces. This was the primordial age, a time when the very fabric of existence in the lands between was fundamentally different from what players encounter in the game's present day. To understand the conflicts and powers that shape the world of the DLC, we must first journey back to these earliest moments, when the boundaries between life forms were not yet drawn, and when beings of incomprehensible power first cast their gaze upon the nascent world. The Formless Mother stands as one of the most enigmatic outer gods in Elden Ring's cosmology. Unlike the Greater Will, which would later impose order and structure upon the lands between through the Elden Ring, The formless mother exists in a realm entirely beyond the physical world. She is an entity of blood and wounds, a being whose very essence is tied to the concept of bloodshed and the ecstatic communion found in violence. The term outer god refers to cosmic entities that exist outside the normal bounds of the lands between, influencing the world from dimensions beyond mortal comprehension. These beings do not walk among mortals, but instead exert their will through emissaries, through curses, and through the subtle warping of reality itself. The formless mother's domain is particularly visceral. She does not simply represent blood as a life force, but as something more profound and disturbing. Blood, in her cosmology, is a medium of connection, a way to transcend the boundaries of individual existence. Her influence would later manifest most clearly in figures like Mog, Lord of Blood, who seeks to create a new dynasty through blood ritual and sacrifice. But even in these primordial times, her presence was felt in ways both subtle and profound. Simultaneously, within the lands between itself, another fundamental force was taking shape. The primordial crucible represents the original and unified form of all life in this world. Imagine, if you will, a state of existence where the distinctions we take for granted, the separation between species, between plant and animal, between dragon and human, simply did not exist. The crucible was not a place or an object, but rather a condition, a primordial soup of life energy, where all potential forms existed in a state of beautiful, chaotic unity. Every living thing that would later populate the lands between, from the lowliest creature to the mightiest demigod, can trace its origins back to this singular source. The crucible was life in its purest, most undifferentiated state, containing within it the seeds of infinite possibility. This was not a peaceful or static existence, however. The crucible churned with raw, untamed energy. Life forms that emerged from it, or existed within its influence, were marked by a wildness, a primal vitality that later ages would come to fear and suppress. All life in the nascent lands between was once blended together within this crucible of existence. There were no pure bloodlines, no distinct races, no clear hierarchies. A being might possess the characteristics of multiple creatures simultaneously. The boundaries between self and other were permeable, fluid. This was an age before civilization, before culture, before the imposition of order that would characterize later epochs. It is here, in this primordial state, that the influence of the formless mother first touched the lands between. Though she existed beyond the world, her essence found a kind of resonance with the crucible's energies. The crucible, after all, was a place where boundaries dissolved, where separate things became one. The formless mother's philosophy of blood as a unifying force, as something that connects all living beings through shared suffering and ecstasy, found fertile ground in this primordial mixing. Her influence did not dominate or control the crucible. Rather, it permeated it, intertwining with those raw energies in ways that would have lasting consequences. The blood that flowed through crucible life forms carried with it a trace of her power, a potential for the kind of transcendent violence that she embodied. This was not yet worship or conscious devotion. The beings of the crucible age were too primal for such concepts. But the seed was planted, the connection established. The power that the crucible bestowed upon early life forms was unlike anything that would come later. When the Golden Order eventually rose to prominence, it would prize purity, separation, and hierarchy. But crucible power was the opposite of all these things. It manifested as a raw, untamed force that granted beings characteristics drawn from the entire spectrum of life. A creature might sprout horns like a beast, develop wings like a bird, or grow a tail like a reptile. These were not mutations or deformities in the negative sense. They were expressions of the crucible's fundamental truth that all life shares a common origin and that the potential for any form exists within every living being. The various animalistic features that appeared were not random, but rather reflected the primal aspects of existence: survival and predation, flight, defense. They were the tools that life itself had developed over countless iterations, now made manifest in individual beings through the crucible's power. Among the earliest and most powerful beings to emerge in this age were the ancient dragons. These magnificent creatures were not merely large reptiles, but something far more fundamental to the world's structure. The ancient dragons were deeply connected to the crucible's power in ways that few other beings could match. Their stone scales, which you encounter in the game as incredibly durable materials, were not just armor, but a physical manifestation of the crucible's transformative energy made permanent and enduring. Dragons possessed an innate connection to the primal forces of the world. Their lightning, their stone-like flesh, their immense vitality, all of these traits marked them as beings who embodied the crucible's power in its most concentrated form. Dragon Lord Placidusax, who players can encounter in a hidden area of Farum Azula, represents this ancient draconic power. Even in his diminished state, wounded and waiting for the return of his god, Placidusax demonstrates the sheer might that the crucible could grant. The ancient dragons were not merely products of the crucible age. They were its champions, its most successful expressions, beings who would continue to shape the world long after the crucible itself had been suppressed and feared. The crucible's power is not viewed with fear or suspicion in these primordial times. Instead, it is seen as a blessing, a direct link to the fundamental forces of life itself. Warriors who bear the characteristics of the crucible, those who manifest its ancient energies through breath and tail and horn, are celebrated as exemplars of vitality. The crucible knights who serve in this age do not hide their abilities or view them as aberrations. They are living proof that the old magic, the original wellspring of existence, still flows through mortal vessels. Their techniques, such as the aspects of the crucible that allow them to sprout horns or sweep enemies with a tail, are not mutations to be ashamed of, but rather manifestations of the world's truest nature. These abilities connect them to something older and more authentic than any order that would come later. The Erdtree itself, in its earliest form, is deeply rooted in and nourished by the crucible. This is a crucial detail that many scholars of the lands between overlook when they examine the Golden Order's later claims of supremacy. The great tree that would become the symbol of Marika's reign does not spring forth from nothing, nor does it represent a complete break from what came before. Instead, its roots drink deeply from the crucible's primordial energies. The Erdtree's initial growth is sustained by the same chaotic vitality that produces amalgamated creatures and blended forms. In this sense, the tree is not opposed to the crucible, but rather an extension of it, a grand flowering that draws upon the same source. The distinction between crucible and Erdtree is not yet sharp. They exist in a state of continuity, with the tree representing perhaps a focusing or channeling of the crucible's raw power rather than its negation. The concept of oneness and the blending of all life is central to the crucible's nature. This is not merely a philosophical abstraction, but a literal truth about how existence functions in this primordial state. Creatures are not yet locked into fixed forms with rigid boundaries between species and types. The blending is physical, spiritual, and essential. Life flows between forms with a fluidity that later ages would find horrifying. A being might possess characteristics of multiple animals or features that seem to belong to plant and beast simultaneously. This is not corruption or disease, but the natural state of things when all life shares a common origin, and that origin remains close and accessible. The crucible represents a world before specialization, before the hardening of categories, before the imposition of hierarchies that separate gold from dross, noble from base, pure from impure. The formless mother's desire for a unified, yet rotting and bleeding existence aligns with aspects of the crucible's primordial blending in ways that are both profound and disturbing. Where the crucible represents the fusion of all life into a churning whole, the formless mother seeks a unity achieved through the sharing of blood and wound. Both reject the notion of discrete, separate beings maintaining clear boundaries. Both embrace a vision of existence where individual identity dissolves into something larger and more fundamental. The mother's obsession with blood as a unifying substance echoes the crucible's original state, where all life shared a common essence. However, there is a crucial difference in tone and intent. The crucible's blending is generative and vital, producing new forms and possibilities. The formless mother's vision, by contrast, is one of ecstatic suffering, where unity comes through shared pain and the dissolution of the flesh through bleeding. She does not seek the vibrant chaos of the crucible, but rather a communion achieved through wounds that never close, through blood that flows eternally between all things, binding them in agony. The eventual emergence of the Golden Order and its emphasis on order and separation begins to diverge from the crucible's unified state. This shift does not happen suddenly, but unfolds across generations as Queen Marika the Eternal consolidates her power and establishes the principles that will govern the lands between. The Golden Order, as it develops, prizes clarity over chaos, definition over fusion, hierarchy over equality. It seeks to impose categories and distinctions where the crucible recognized only continuity. The Order's emphasis on the golden and the pure implicitly rejects the crucible's indiscriminate blending. Under the Golden Order's logic, some forms of life are elevated while others are diminished. The Erdtree, once nourished by the crucible, begins to be understood not as an extension of that primordial force, but as its refinement, its perfection, its transcendence. The rhetoric changes. What was once celebrated as the source of all life becomes reframed as primitive, unrefined, a stage that had to be surpassed for true civilization to emerge. The crucible's influence gradually wanes as the Golden Order establishes its dominance and refines the world according to its principles. This is not a violent suppression, at least not initially, but rather a slow marginalization. The energies of the crucible do not disappear. They cannot be entirely eliminated, but they are pushed to the periphery. Creatures that embody the crucible's blended nature are increasingly viewed with suspicion rather than reverence. The misbegotten, those beings who seem to combine human and animal traits in ways that recall the crucible's ancient workings, are enslaved and degraded. The omens, born with horns and features that mark them as touched by something old and powerful, are either imprisoned beneath the capital or, if they are fortunate enough to be born into royalty, merely tolerated with disgust. What was once a blessing becomes a curse. The same characteristics that would have marked someone as special in the age of the crucible now mark them as aberrant, as failures of the Golden Order's refining process. The Crucible Knights, though still powerful, become relics of a bygone era as the Golden Order's tenets take hold. These warriors, who once stood at the pinnacle of martial prowess and spiritual connection, find themselves increasingly out of step with the new world. Their techniques, their very bodies in some cases, remind everyone of a time before the Golden Order's supremacy. They are respected for their strength, certainly, and some continue to serve in positions of honor, but they are no longer the ideal. The new ideal is the knight who serves the Erdtree directly, who channels golden light rather than primordial chaos, who maintains clear boundaries and pure purpose. The Crucible Knights are allowed to persist, but they are understood as remnants, as links to a past that has been superseded. Their armor, their incantations, their very existence becomes a kind of living museum, a reminder of what the world once was, before Marika's order refined it into something cleaner, more controlled, and ultimately more fragile. Miquella's Erdtree later attempts to recreate a similar unified state, albeit without the formless mother's direct influence, seeking a perfect, unalloyed form of oneness. This is one of the great ironies of the Lands Between's history. Miquella, the unalloyed, Empyrean child of Marika, looks back past his mother's golden order to something more ancient. His Erdtree is an attempt to recapture the Crucible's promise of unity and wholeness without the Golden Order's exclusions as and hierarchies. Yet Miquella seeks to achieve this through purity rather than chaos, through unalloyed gold rather than primordial blending. He wants the oneness without the wildness, the unity without the loss of control. It is an ambitious, perhaps impossible vision that attempts to synthesize the Crucible's inclusive nature with the Golden Order's refinement, creating something that honors both while being limited by neither. Long before the Erdtree would cast its golden light across the lands between, in the ancient era that preceded even the earliest records of civilization, the world existed in a state of primordial chaos and possibility. This was the age of the primordial crucible, a churning wellspring of life energy that would eventually give rise to the Erdtree itself. The crucible represented not order, but abundance, a time when all life was blended together in a single, unified whole. From this crucible emerged creatures both wondrous and terrible, beings whose forms had not yet been separated into the distinct categories that would later define the natural world. It was a time of fire and fury, of raw elemental power, unchained by the laws that would come to govern reality under the Golden Order. In this primordial landscape, among the highest peaks, where the earth scraped against the sky itself, dwelt the fire giants. These colossal beings, towering monuments of flesh and flame, made their home in the region that would come to be known as the mountain tops of the giants. The mountains themselves seem to have been shaped by their presence, carved and scorched by generations of these massive creatures who moved through the crags and valleys like living avalanches. The fire giants were not merely large humans, but an entirely distinct race, possessed of proportions and features that set them apart from all other inhabitants of the lands between. Their bodies were built to withstand extremes of temperature that would incinerate lesser beings, their skin thick and weathered like cooled magma, their frames supporting muscle and bone of impossible density. Most distinctive among their features was the singular eye that each fire giant possessed, a great orb set into the center of their torsos, burning with an inner light that spoke of powers beyond mortal comprehension. This was no mere organ of sight, though the giants could indeed perceive through these eyes. Rather, the eye served as a conduit, a living gateway through which the power of their patron deity could flow into the material world. For the fire giants were not alone in their mountain fastness. They served, worshipped, and drew strength from an outer god of terrible majesty, the fell god, an entity of fire and annihilation whose very existence was anathema to the ordered world that Marika would later seek to establish. The fell god represented destruction in its purest form, not the mindless chaos of entropy, but the deliberate cleansing power of flame. Where the formless mother had offered blood and the promise of dynasty, the fell god offered something far simpler and far more absolute: fire that could not be extinguished, heat that could reduce all things to ash and memory. The fell god did not speak in whispers or demand subtle rituals of devotion. Its presence was felt in every flame that danced in the giants' forges, in every spark that leaped from stone, struck against stone, in the very warmth that sustained life in the frozen peaks where the giants made their home. Through their unique eyes, the fire giants channeled the fell god's essence, manifesting it as the flame of ruin. This was no ordinary fire. The flame of ruin burned with a supernatural intensity, fueled not merely by wood or oil, but by the fundamental force of destruction itself. It was a flame that could consume anything given time and fuel. Stone melted before it, metal ran like water. And most significantly, most terrifyingly, from the perspective of those who would later serve the Golden Order, the flame of ruin possessed the power to burn the Erdtree itself. In a world where the great tree would come to symbolize eternal life and divine order, the fire giants possessed the one weapon capable of reducing it to cinders. The giants incorporated the flame of ruin into every aspect of their existence. Their rituals, conducted on great stone altars carved into the mountainsides, involved the kindling of sacred fires that burned for days without consuming their fuel. These ceremonial flames served as focal points for their worship, physical manifestations of the fell god's presence in the material world. The giants would gather before these fires, their single eyes reflecting the dancing light, and offer prayers in voices that rumbled like distant thunder. They believed that in tending these flames, in keeping them burning through the endless winters that gripped their mountain home, they maintained a connection to their God, ensuring that its power would never fade from the world. But the flame of ruin was not merely a tool of worship. It was a weapon, perhaps the most devastating weapon in the ancient world. The fire giants could summon this supernatural fire at will, drawing it forth from their torso eyes in great gouts of searing destruction. In battle, they wielded it with terrifying effectiveness, incinerating enemies before they could even close to striking distance. The very ground where they fought would be scorched black, transformed into fields of volcanic glass by the intensity of the heat they commanded. Entire armies could be reduced to ash in moments when the fire giants roused themselves to war. For countless ages, the fire giants remained in their mountain stronghold, largely isolated from the other inhabitants of the lands between. They had no need to descend into the lowlands, no desire to conquer or expand their territory. The mountains provided everything they required, and their worship of the fell god gave their existence meaning and purpose. They were content, in their way, to serve as the keepers of the flame of ruin, the guardians of a power that could unmake the world if ever it were unleashed without restraint. But this age of isolation could not last forever. As the primordial crucible began to give way to more ordered forms of existence, as the Erdtree began to take shape and spread its influence across the lands between, a new power arose that would not tolerate the existence of the fire giants and their destructive god. Queen Marika the Eternal, a figure of divine ambition and iron will, had begun her campaign to establish the Golden Order, a new system of natural law that would replace the chaotic abundance of the Crucible with structured, hierarchical perfection. Marika envisioned a world unified under the Erdtree's golden light, where death itself would be controlled and channeled according to her design, where all beings would find their place in an eternal, unchanging order. The fire giants represented everything that threatened this vision. Their fell god stood in direct opposition to the Golden Order's principles. Where Marika sought to preserve and eternalize, the fell god embodied destruction and ending. Where the Erdtree promised eternal life through its grace, the flame of ruin promised only ash. Most dangerously, the fire giants possessed the one weapon that could actually threaten the Erdtree itself, the physical manifestation of Marika's power and the cornerstone of her new world order. And so, driven by ambition, by necessity, and perhaps by fear of what the flame of ruin represented, Queen Marika the Eternal declared war upon the fire giants. Marika's forces prosecuted the war with methodical brutality, hunting the fire giants across the frozen peaks and hidden valleys of the mountain tops. The Golden Order's soldiers, bolstered by Godfrey's strength and Marika's divine authority, moved through the giant settlements like a scythe through wheat. The fire giants, despite their immense size and command over flame, found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Where once they had stood as the undisputed masters of the mountain realm, they now fought a desperate defensive war against an enemy that would accept nothing less than total victory. Each giant that fell represented not just a warrior lost, but a living repository of their culture, their stories, their connection to the fell god. The systematic nature of the slaughter suggests this was not merely a military campaign, but a deliberate attempt to erase the fire giants as a people, to sever their connection to their deity, and ensure that the flame of ruin could never again threaten the Erdtree's supremacy. The war ground on until only a handful of giants remained, scattered and isolated, unable to mount any coordinated resistance. And then there was one, the last fire giant, a being of tremendous power and sorrow, stood alone atop the highest peak, the final guardian of his people's legacy. Some accounts name him Yhorm, though whether this was his true name or a title bestowed upon him by his vanquished people remains unclear. What is certain is that he represented the last obstacle to Marika's complete dominion over the mountain tops, the final ember of resistance that needed to be extinguished. Marika herself ascended to face him, not content to delegate this final confrontation to her champions. The battle between goddess and giant shook the mountains, flame and holy light clashing in a spectacle that would be remembered in legend. The giant fought with the fury of his entire race, channeling the full power of the fell god through his massive frame, hurling columns of fire and wielding weapons forged in the heart of the forge itself. But Marika's power, drawn from the Elden Ring and the greater will's cosmic authority, proved superior. She struck him down, bringing the towering warrior to his knees in the snow. Victory was within her grasp. A single blow would end the fire giants forever, would complete the genocide she had orchestrated. Yet Marika stayed her hand. What followed was not mercy, but something far crueler. Rather than granting the last giant the dignity of death, the honor of joining his fallen kin, Marika chose to curse him with immortality. She bound him with divine magic, ensuring he could never die, never escape his duty, never find peace. This was not compassion, but calculated cruelty, a punishment designed to serve the Golden Order's interests for all eternity. The curse served as the foundation for an even more elaborate working of divine power. Marika performed a sealing ritual, one of the most complex and potent acts of magic in the history of the lands between. She took the essence of the fell god itself, the primordial flame that had burned since time immemorial, and bound it directly into Yuhorm's body. The ritual focused the flame of ruin into the giant's belly, transforming his physical form into a living prison for the power of his god. The giant became both jailer and prisoner, his immortal body the only barrier preventing the fell god's flame from erupting back into the world. The agony of this binding can scarcely be imagined. To have the very power of your deity, the flame your people had worshipped and tended for generations, sealed within your own flesh, burning eternally but never consuming, must have been torment beyond description. The sealing achieved Marika's strategic objective with brutal efficiency. By binding the flame of ruin to a single controlled source, she prevented its widespread use. No longer could the fire giants call upon their god's power in battle. No longer could the flame be wielded as a weapon against the Erdtree. The threat that had so concerned Marika, the one force capable of burning her golden tree to ash, was now contained, locked away in the body of a broken immortal guardian. The forge atop the mountain, once the beating heart of fire giant civilization, became a prison. Its flames still burned, fed by the power sealed in the giant's body, but they burned under Marika's terms, subject to her control. Marika's decree formalized the giant's eternal punishment. She commanded that Yuhorm would forever tend the flame of ruin, maintaining the forge's fire but never allowing it to grow beyond its bounds. He would be the guardian of the very power that had defined his people, ensuring it never again threatened the Erdtree. The irony was deliberate and vicious. The last of the fire giants would spend eternity protecting the Golden Order from the flame his people had worshipped. He would be a living monument to their defeat, a reminder that even the most ancient and powerful forces could be subjugated by Marika's will. The giant's immortality meant he could never escape this duty through death, never find release from his vigil. As long as the Erdtree stood, he would remain bound to the mountaintop, tending the flame that could destroy everything Marika had built. The fire giant's civilization lay in ruins. Their settlements were abandoned or destroyed, their forges cold, their people extinct, save for the single cursed survivor. The culture that had thrived in the mountains for untold ages, that had built a society around the worship of the fell god and the tending of the primordial flame, was effectively erased. The Golden Order moved to suppress what remained. The worship of the fell god was forbidden, its rituals outlawed, its sacred sites desecrated or repurposed. Any artifacts or texts that might preserve the fire giant's religious practices were destroyed or hidden away. Marika sought not just military victory, but cultural annihilation, ensuring that future generations would barely remember the people who had once commanded the flame of ruin. Yet complete erasure proved impossible. The flame of ruin, though sealed, remained a latent threat. It burned still in the giant's belly, in the forge atop the mountain, a spark of primordial power that could never be fully extinguished. The fell god, though bound and suppressed, was not destroyed. Its essence persisted, waiting patient in the way that elemental forces are patient. Should the seal ever break, should the giant ever be freed or killed, the flame would return. The destructive power that had threatened the Erdtree would erupt once more, capable of burning away the Golden Order's carefully constructed world. This possibility haunted Marika's reign, a shadow at the edge of her golden age, a reminder that some forces are too fundamental to truly destroy. Some remnants of the fire giant's legacy survived despite Marika's efforts. The giant's seal, an incantation of considerable power, preserved both the memory and the essence of the fire giant's ancient flame. This incantation, passed down through hidden channels or preserved in forgotten texts, allowed practitioners to channel a fraction of the Flame of Ruin's power. It served as proof that the fire giant's connection to their god could not be entirely severed, that their mastery of flame had left an indelible mark on the world. Those who learned the giant's seal could call upon fire in ways that echoed the primordial flame, though such power was dangerous and forbidden under the Golden Order's law. With the fell god of the giants now sealed away, the lands between, though still a land of diverse beliefs and burgeoning civilizations, was poised for a monumental shift. We now move to the third entry on our timeline, a pivotal moment that would forever alter the destiny of this world, the arrival of the Greater Will, occurring in what we refer to as the pre-Erdtree era. This period marks the true genesis of the Golden Order, an epic that would dominate the lands between for millennia. From the vast, unknowable expanse of the cosmos, a new power began to exert its influence. This was the Greater Will, an outer god, one of the many cosmic entities that exist beyond the terrestrial confines of the lands between. Unlike the chaotic, destructive nature of some other outer gods, the Greater Will's domain was order, a grand, overarching design for existence, often expressed through the motif of golden light. Its arrival was not a physical manifestation in the same way a giant might walk the earth, but rather a permeating divine presence, a cosmic will that began to subtly, then overtly, shape the very fabric of reality in this corner of the universe. The Greater Will, in essence, sought to impose its divine order upon the lands between, to bring what it perceived as true prosperity and stability to its inhabitants. Its methods were not direct conquest, but rather the establishment of a system, a set of divine laws and principles that would govern all life. To achieve this monumental task, the Greater Will dispatched its most potent instrument, a living embodiment of its divine intent, the Elden beast. This creature was not merely a messenger or an avatar, but a direct extension of the Greater Will itself, a physical manifestation of its power and its unwavering desire for order. The Elden beast was sent to the lands between with a singular purpose, to establish and enforce the Greater Will's dominion. Its journey across the cosmos was heralded by celestial phenomena, a testament to its immense power and significance. Witnessed by the early inhabitants of the lands between, the Elden beast descended from the heavens as a brilliant golden star, a celestial firework streaking across the firmament. Its trajectory was precise, its impact cataclysmic, yet not destructive in the conventional sense. This wasn't a meteor of ruin, but a harbinger of a new age. The golden star crashed into the lands between, not leaving a crater of devastation, but rather planting the seed of a new cosmic order. The exact location of its landing is shrouded in the mists of ancient history, but its effects would resonate across the entire continent. Upon its impact, the Elden beast did not remain in its stellar form. Instead, It underwent a profound transformation, becoming the very heart of the new divine order, the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring is not a physical ring in the traditional sense, but rather a conceptual framework, a collection of fundamental laws and destinies that govern the reality of the lands between. It is the very essence of the greater will's design, dictating concepts like life, death, fate, and causality. With the Elden Beast's transformation into the Elden Ring, the Golden Order was officially established. This was not a gradual evolution, but a definitive singular event that redefined existence. The Golden Order, as its name suggests, was founded on the principles of the greater will, emphasizing order, structure, and the inherent divinity of golden light. It promised a new era of peace and prosperity, a unified realm under the benevolent, albeit absolute rule of the greater will. Almost immediately, the Golden Order's influence began its inexorable spread across the lands between. Its tenets, initially propagated by divine decree and later by chosen emissaries, offered a compelling vision of stability and advancement. Civilizations that had previously warred or existed in isolation found themselves drawn into the orbit of this new power. The promise of an end to chaos, of a structured existence where prosperity could flourish, proved irresistible to many. The Golden Order brought with it not just spiritual guidance, but also advancements in various fields, from architecture to governance, all imbued with the aesthetic and philosophical principles of the greater will. The golden hue that permeated its symbolism became synonymous with divine favor and righteous rule. This was an era of unprecedented growth and unification, laying the groundwork for the powerful empire that would eventually emerge. To serve as its earthly proxy, a vessel through which its power could be channeled and its will enacted, the greater will chose an Empyrean. An Empyrean is a being of exceptional power and divine potential, chosen by an outer god to become a god themselves. In this pivotal moment, the greater will selected Marika. Her origins before this selection are largely unknown, shrouded in the ancient past, but her destiny was now undeniably linked to the cosmic power that had descended upon the lands between. Marika was chosen not just for her strength, but for her perceived purity and her capacity to embody the ideals of the Golden Order. She was to be the living conduit for the Elden Ring's immense power, the mortal interface between the divine laws and the earthly realm. With her selection as Empyrean, Marika was elevated to godhood, becoming Queen Marika the Eternal. This was a transformation of immense significance, marking her as the undisputed sovereign of the lands between, a divine ruler whose authority stemmed directly from the greater will itself. As Queen Marika, she was not merely a queen, but a living goddess, her very being intertwined with the Elden Ring. Her reign would usher in an era of unparalleled stability and expansion for the Golden Order, an era that would see the lands between reach the zenith of its power and influence. Her divine status gave her absolute authority, and her pronouncements were considered law, backed by the cosmic power of the greater will. And as Queen Marika's reign began, so too did the growth of the most iconic symbol of the Golden Order, the Erdtree. This colossal tree, radiating a brilliant golden light, began to sprout and ascend, drawing its immense power directly from the Elden Ring itself. The Erdtree was not merely a large tree, it was a living manifestation of the Golden Order's prosperity and divine favor, its roots delving deep into the earth, its branches reaching towards the heavens. It became the central pillar of the lands between, both literally and figuratively, its golden leaves showering the land with blessings and its presence signifying the benevolent rule of the greater will. The Erdtree's growth was a visible testament to the flourishing power of the Golden Order, a beacon of light and life that overshadowed all other natural formations and became the focal point of worship and reverence for the burgeoning empire. Its golden glow was a constant reminder of the divine presence that now governed the lands between, a symbol of the new era of order and prosperity that had been ushered in by the arrival of the greater will and the establishment of the Golden Order. The Erdtree, now fully established and radiating its golden light across the lands between, became the undisputed central symbol and primary source of grace for the nascent Golden Order. Its colossal branches stretched into the heavens, its roots delving deep into the earth, drawing sustenance and power from the very fabric of the world. This magnificent tree wasn't just a landmark, it was the physical manifestation of the greater will's influence, a literal conduit for its divine energy. The golden sap, known as grace, flowed from its trunk, imbuing everything it touched with a sacred luminescence. This grace was not merely aesthetic, it was the very essence of the Golden Order's power, bestowing blessings, guiding individuals, and even resurrecting the fallen, albeit imperfectly. The Erdtree's presence redefined the landscape, both physically and spiritually, anchoring the greater will's dominion in a tangible, undeniable form. However, the Erdtree's rise wasn't without consequence. The crucible, the primordial form of the Erdtree, a more chaotic and untamed manifestation of life's raw energy, found itself increasingly suppressed. The crucible represented a time before rigid order, a period where all life, in its myriad forms, was intertwined and celebrated. Its aspects, such as the omen's horns and tails, which were once seen as signs of divinity and strength, were now deemed heretical, monstrous deformities to be purged or hidden. The Golden Order, in its pursuit of a singular, pure vision, actively worked to eradicate or reinterpret any remnants of this earlier, more diverse era. This suppression wasn't just theological, it had profound societal implications, marginalizing entire groups and creating a rigid hierarchy where conformity to the Erdtree's aesthetic and spiritual ideals was paramount. The Crucible Knights, once revered warriors embodying this primordial power, were either assimilated or, in many cases, ostracized, their unique abilities now seen as an affront to the new order. With the Erdtree firmly in place, the greater will solidified its earthly representation through the establishment of the golden lineage, a line of demigods born through Marika, chosen as its vessel. Marika, the eternal queen, became the central figure of this new divine hierarchy. Her offspring, imbued with the potent blood of the Erdtree and the greater will's blessing, were destined to rule and uphold the Golden Order. This lineage wasn't merely a succession plan, it was a divine right, intended to ensure the stability and longevity of the greater will's dominion. Each demigod, from the mighty Godfrey to the enigmatic Rani, played a crucial role in shaping the lands between, their lives and actions intrinsically linked to the fate of the Erdtree and the Golden Order. Their existence served as a constant reminder of the greater will's direct involvement in the world, a tangible connection between the divine and the mortal. As the Golden Order flourished, the concept of grace, a guiding light from the greater will, became increasingly prevalent among the tarnished, those who had lost the Erdtree's blessing and were exiled from the lands between. This grace, though subtle and often misunderstood, served as a beacon, drawing the tarnished back to the lands between, hinting at a grander purpose. It was not a physical force, but a spiritual inclination, a whisper in the heart, urging them towards a destiny intertwined with the Erdtree. This guiding light became a central tenet of the Golden Order's philosophy, emphasizing the greater will's benevolent oversight and its desire for order and prosperity. The tarnished, once outcast, were now, in a strange twist of fate, part of the greater will's grand design, their return a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. To facilitate direct communication with its earthly agents, the two fingers, emissaries of the greater will, were established. These colossal, grotesque digits, housed within the divine towers across the lands between, served as oracles, interpreting the will of the greater will and relaying its commands to its chosen champions. The two fingers were not merely messengers, they were conduits, their pronouncements held as absolute truth, shaping the policies and actions of the Golden Order. Their presence underscored the greater will's active involvement in the daily affairs of the lands between, ensuring that its divine directives were understood and executed without question. The two fingers became a symbol of the greater will's unwavering authority, a constant reminder of its omnipresent influence. With its power consolidated, the Golden Order began to aggressively assimilate or suppress other existing belief systems and powers that predated its arrival. This was a systematic campaign to establish religious and political hegemony. The ancient earth worship of the giants, with their reverence for the fell god, was met with brutal conquest, culminating in their near extinction and the sealing of their sacred flame. The worship of the moon, particularly prevalent in the Carian royal family, was tolerated only as long as it did not challenge the supremacy of the Erdtree, leading to a delicate and often tense coexistence. The various tribes and clans that held diverse spiritual practices were either converted through missionary efforts, often backed by military force, or driven into hiding. This period saw the systematic dismantling of ancient traditions, the destruction of sacred sites, and the rewriting of history to align with the Golden Order's narrative. Any power that could potentially rival the Erdtree, whether magical, spiritual, or political, was either brought under its dominion or utterly crushed. This era marked a significant shift from a diverse pantheon of beliefs to a monotheistic dominance, enforced by the might of the Golden Order. One of the most significant challenges to the Golden Order's dominion came from the ancient dragons, once the undisputed rulers of the lands between. These colossal, intelligent beings, with their mastery of lightning and their ancient stone scales, represented a formidable power that predated even the Crucible. The Golden Order, under the leadership of Godfrey, Marika's first Elden Lord, engaged in a protracted and brutal war against the Dragon Lords. This was not merely a territorial dispute, it was a clash of cosmic powers, a struggle for ultimate authority over the lands between. The war was devastating, scarring the land and costing countless lives on both sides. Ultimately, through strategic brilliance and overwhelming force, Godfrey and his warriors managed to challenge and eventually subjugate the dragons. While not entirely eradicated, their power was broken, their influence diminished, and their greatest leader, Fortisax, fell to the might of the Golden Order. This victory was a monumental achievement, solidifying the Golden Order's military might and cementing its position as the dominant power in the lands between. The dragons, once proud rulers, were now either subservient in hiding or reduced to mere relics of a bygone era. With the dragons subjugated, the diverse belief systems either assimilated or suppressed, and the Erdtree radiating its golden light across a unified dominion, the age of the Erdtree guided by the Golden Order officially began. This era marked a period of unprecedented stability, prosperity, and order, all under the benevolent, or iron fisted, depending on your perspective, rule of the Greater Will. The Golden Order, with Marika as its eternal queen and the Erdtree as its central pillar, ushered in a new epoch, one where its laws, its faith, and its divine mandate were absolute. The lands between, once a chaotic tapestry of disparate powers, were now woven into a singular golden fabric, reflecting the unyielding will of its new divine sovereign. This was the dawn of a golden age, a time of immense power and influence for the Golden Order, a period that would shape the destiny of the lands between for millennia to come. We now shift our focus to an entity whose very existence is a direct challenge to the established order, a force that predates even the Erdtree itself, the Frenzied Flame. In the pre-Erdtree era, long before the golden boughs of the Erdtree stretched towards the heavens, and the greater will asserted its dominion over the lands between, a primordial chaos stirred beneath the surface. This was the Frenzied Flame, an outer god of pure, unadulterated destruction, and a stark antithesis to the greater will's desire for order and life. Where the greater will sought to impose a structured reality, to cultivate and to guide, the Frenzied Flame yearned for the complete undoing of all creation, a return to a singular, undifferentiated state. It envisioned a world, or rather a non-world, where all distinctions, all individual wills, all forms of life and death would be melted down into a single, formless whole, an indistinguishable sea of primordial energy. This wasn't merely a desire for destruction for its own sake, but a philosophy, a twisted form of unity achieved through absolute annihilation. The influence of the Frenzied Flame, unlike the celestial origins of many other outer gods, is deeply rooted in the very fabric of the earth itself. It is a primordial force, a primal scream from the depths, predating the Erdtree and its golden lineage. Imagine the raw, untamed energies that existed before any form took shape, before the stars were sown, before the very concept of life or death had meaning. This is the essence of the Frenzied Flame. Its power manifests as a searing, yellow flame, an inferno that burns not just the flesh, but the mind and soul. Those unfortunate enough to be touched by this flame are not simply harmed. They are driven to an irreversible madness, their eyes glowing with the same baleful yellow light, their minds consumed by an all-encompassing desire for chaos and destruction. This madness is not a mere loss of sanity. It is a complete reorientation of one's being towards the nihilistic goals of the Frenzied Flame, a conversion into a vessel for its destructive will. The very air around sites of intense Frenzied Flame activity hums with an unnerving energy, a palpable sense of impending doom and the dissolution of all things. The earth itself seems to weep and crack under its influence, as if straining against the unnatural desire to return to nothingness. Crucially, the Frenzied Flame, like many outer gods, does not directly intervene in the world. Instead, it operates through intermediaries, through chosen vessels and prophets. In this pre-Erdtree era, these conduits took the form of the Three Fingers, ancient colossal entities whose very presence hummed with the primordial power of the Frenzied Flame. These three fingers were not just symbols, they were physical manifestations of the outer god's will, serving as its primary conduits and prophets. They were the voice of the Frenzied Flame, whispering its destructive doctrine into the minds of those susceptible to its influence. Their messages were insidious, appealing to the deepest anxieties and sufferings of sentient beings. They didn't preach wanton chaos without reason. Instead, they offered a perverse promise of unity, a release from the pain of division, individuality, and the inherent suffering that comes with existence. For those who felt alienated, oppressed, or simply overwhelmed by the complexities and cruelties of life, the Three Fingers offered a radical solution: dissolve all distinctions, and with them all suffering. Their whispers were a siren song for the desperate, a promise of ultimate peace through ultimate destruction, a return to a state where there is no self to suffer, no other to cause pain. This doctrine, while horrific to those who value life and order, held a strange, dark allure for those who had nothing left to lose. The very act of succumbing to the frenzied flame for some was seen as a liberation, a shedding of the burdens of existence. Among the early and most influential proponents of the frenzied flame's doctrine was Shabriri, a figure whose name would become synonymous with its destructive evangelism. Shabriri was not merely a follower, he was a prophet, a devoted servant who actively spread the message of the frenzied flame among the desperate and downtrodden. His methods were insidious and remarkably effective, allowing his influence to persist across generations, even centuries. Shabriri understood the power of despair, the fertile ground it provided for radical ideologies. He sought out those who were marginalized, those who had been cast aside by society, those who suffered from the cruelties of the world and the perceived injustices of the existing order. To these individuals, he presented the frenzied flame not as a destructive force, but as a liberator, an ultimate solution to their woes. He painted a picture of a world free from conflict, from pain, from the very concept of individual suffering, achieved through the annihilation of all distinct forms. What made Shabriri particularly effective and terrifying was his unique ability to transcend his own mortality. Shabriri's methods involved possessing the bodies of others, moving from host to host, allowing him to continue his evangelism across vast stretches of time. When one body withered or was destroyed, Shabriri's consciousness, imbued with the frenzied flame's power, would simply transfer to another fresh host. This allowed him to maintain a continuous presence, to adapt his message to different eras and different populations, ensuring that the seeds of the frenzied flame's ideology were constantly being sown. Imagine the chilling implications of such an ability. A prophet who cannot truly die, whose message is eternal, constantly finding new voices and new bodies to spread its destructive gospel. This allowed him to establish a lineage of influence, a continuous chain of indoctrination that spanned generations, ensuring that even as the world changed around him, the core tenets of the frenzied flame remained alive and continued to fester in the hearts of the desperate. His evangelism was not a fleeting phenomenon, but a persistent, insidious whisper that echoed through the ages, laying the groundwork for the frenzied flame's eventual resurgence in later eras. The very act of his possession, the taking over of another's will, mirrored the ultimate goal of the frenzied flame itself: the dissolution of individual identity into a greater, albeit chaotic, whole. This was the beginning of the frenzied flame's long incubation, a slow, methodical spread of its terrifying ideology, setting the stage for its eventual clash with the forces of order. The ostracization and persecution faced by the nomadic merchants, a cultural group known for their distinctive clothing and musical instruments, rendered them particularly susceptible to the alluring whispers of the frenzied flame. These merchants, often viewed with suspicion and scorn by the more established societies of the lands between due to their itinerant lifestyle and perceived foreignness, found themselves increasingly marginalized. Their traditional routes for trade and cultural exchange were disrupted, their communities fragmented, and their very existence became a source of discomfort for those who valued order and stasis. This systemic oppression created a deep seated vulnerability within their collective psyche, a fertile ground for the promises of an entity that sought to dismantle all distinctions and divisions. The frenzied flame, with its nihilistic philosophy of absolute unity through destruction, offered a perverse form of solace to a people who had been systematically alienated and deemed other. It presented an ultimate solution to their suffering, the eradication of the very concept of difference that had led to their persecution. This was not a flame that promised warmth or light in the traditional sense, but rather a consuming inferno that would melt away the boundaries between oppressor and oppressed, rich and poor, native and foreigner, into a singular, undifferentiated chaos. Their suffering deepened immeasurably when many of these merchants were rounded up and buried alive within the labyrinthine depths of the subterranean shunning grounds, a vast network of sewers and catacombs located beneath the burgeoning capital city of Landel. This act of extreme cruelty, likely perpetrated by the Golden Order or its predecessors who sought to purify the lands between of perceived impurities, was intended to silence and erase them. However, this horrific act had an unintended and catastrophic consequence. The very act of their interment, in such close proximity to the nascent stirrings of the frenzied flame within the shunning grounds, served to amplify its influence upon them. The darkness, the isolation, the stench of waste, and the constant threat of slow, agonizing death in those subterranean confines stripped away their sanity. Their minds, already fractured by persecution, were utterly consumed by the maddening power of the three fingers, the physical manifestation of the frenzied flame within the lands between. The flame's insidious whispers, promising release from their torment through utter annihilation, became an irresistible siren song. Their bodies, though confined, became conduits for the flame's chaotic energy, their eyes burning with the telltale yellow glow of madness. Eventually, a significant portion of these afflicted merchants, now united not by kinship or trade, but by their shared affliction and devotion to the destructive god, formed what became known as the Great Caravan. This collective, though imprisoned, represented a living, festering wound beneath the capital. The authorities, recognizing the profound and dangerous nature of the madness that had gripped these individuals, and perhaps fearing the spread of its contagion, took drastic measures. The Great Caravan, along with its maddened members, was ultimately sealed away in the deepest recesses of the subterranean shunning grounds beneath the very foundations of Lendel, the royal capital. This was not merely an act of imprisonment, but a desperate attempt to quarantine a spiritual plague. The sealing was likely a monumental undertaking, employing powerful enchantments and architectural barriers to ensure that the frenzied flame's influence would not breach the surface world. The capital, a beacon of order and prosperity, was unknowingly built upon a simmering cauldron of cosmic madness, a testament to the Golden Order's attempts to bury inconvenient truths. Their prolonged imprisonment and the relentless suffering it entailed only served to intensify their connection to the frenzied flame, Each day spent in the suffocating darkness, each pang of hunger, each moment of despair fueled the flame's power within them. The physical and psychological torment acted as a perverse crucible, forging an unbreakable bond between the merchants and their destructive deity. They became living avatars of its ideology, their very existence a testament to its radical solution for all suffering. Their minds, completely subsumed by the three fingers, no longer registered pain or fear in the conventional sense, only an overwhelming desire to see all creation reduced to a singular, undifferentiated state. This was not merely a passive connection. They actively embodied the flame's principles, their madness a reflection of its chaotic essence. From the depths of their subterranean prison, the merchants' wails and laments echoed through the cold, damp stone, a constant, unsettling hymn to the destructive god they now served. These were not cries of pain in the traditional sense, but rather guttural, discordant sounds born of their profound madness and devotion. Their collective voices, distorted and amplified by the confined spaces, created a chilling chorus that permeated the very bedrock of the capital. It was a mournful, yet fervent song of annihilation, a testament to their unwavering belief in the frenzied flame's promise of an end to all division. These lamentations, imbued with the flame's chaotic energy, served as a continuous ritual, further strengthening the entity's presence within the shunning grounds. It was a constant, low thrumming beneath the surface, a subtle yet pervasive reminder of the destructive power that lay dormant, waiting for its moment to erupt. Indeed, the frenzied flame's presence within the subterranean shunning grounds, particularly after the sealing of the Great Caravan, created a powerful focal point for its chaotic energy. The combination of the merchants' utter devotion, their intense suffering, and the inherent spiritual vulnerability of the location itself transformed the shunning grounds into a veritable wellspring of the flame's power. This was not merely a dormant entity, it was actively incubating, its influence slowly seeping into the surrounding earth and stone. The three fingers, the physical manifestation of this outer god, resided deep within these depths, its very touch capable of imparting the destructive dogma directly into the minds of the susceptible. The shunning grounds became a sacred, albeit terrifying, sanctuary for the frenzied flame, a place where its power could grow and fester, shielded from the light of the Erdtree and the Golden Order. It was a clandestine heart, beating with chaotic rhythm beneath the very symbol of order and life. The ultimate goal of the frenzied flame, as imparted to its followers, was to burn away all that divides. This included not only the distinctions between individuals and societies, but also the fundamental concepts of life and death themselves. The flame sought to return all of creation to a primordial, undifferentiated state, a singular, unified chaos where no form or concept could exist independently. It viewed the very act of creation, of differentiation, as a flawed and painful process, a source of endless suffering and conflict. By reducing everything to ash, by melting away the boundaries of existence, the frenzied flame promised an end to all pain, all division, and all conflict. It was a radical, nihilistic vision of peace, achieved through absolute destruction. This was not merely an aesthetic preference for fire, but a profound philosophical stance against the very nature of existence as perceived by other outer gods and the Golden Order. Though contained, the frenzied flame's influence subtly permeated the lands between, a slow-burning ember beneath the surface of reality. its chaotic energy, emanating from the subterranean shunning grounds, seeped into the collective unconscious, whispering promises of release and annihilation to those who were disillusioned or suffering. It did not overtly manifest its power, but rather worked through insidious suggestion, planting seeds of doubt and despair that could eventually blossom into full blown madness. It was a patient entity, biding its time, waiting for a champion, a vessel who would be strong enough and desperate enough to fully unleash its destructive potential upon the world. This champion would not merely be a follower, but an avatar, a conduit through which the frenzied flame could finally achieve its ultimate goal of returning all to the one great, the primordial soup from which all creation supposedly sprang. The stage was set, the fuse lit, and the lands between unknowingly teetered on the brink of a fiery apocalypse. Our journey through the cosmic machinations of the lands between now brings us to a period stretching from the ancient era into the age of the Erdtree, a vast span of time marked by the insidious influence of the outer god of rot. Previously, we observed the slow, simmering threat of the frenzied flame, a primordial force of destruction. Now, we shift our focus to another malevolent entity, one whose very essence is decay and pestilence, an outer god whose ambition is nothing less than the consumption of all life, reducing existence to a festering, putrid nullity. Long before the golden boughs of the Erdtree ever pierced the heavens, before Marika's reign and the Golden Order's ascendancy, this outer god of rot made its first significant attempt to manifest its horrifying influence in the nascent lands between. This was an era of primordial forces, of ancient dragons and forgotten civilizations, a time when the very fabric of reality was perhaps more pliable, more susceptible to the incursions of extra-dimensional horrors. The lands between, then a wild and untamed expanse, became a battleground for a struggle that would echo through millennia. The outer god of rot, a being of pure corruption, sought to establish a foothold, to begin its slow, inexorable process of turning all that lived into a blighted husk. Its methods are not those of immediate, cataclysmic destruction, but rather a creeping internal erosion, a biological warfare on a cosmic scale. It seeks not to burn, but to rot from within, to transform thriving ecosystems into putrid swamps and living beings into vessels of its virulent plague. It was during this ancient, pre-Erdtree period that a figure of immense power and enigmatic origin rose to confront this burgeoning threat. History, in its often cruel way, has largely forgotten his name, a testament perhaps to the sheer antiquity of the event, or the deliberate obscuring of such a terrifying memory. He is known only as a blind swordsman, a warrior of unparalleled skill whose sightless eyes belied an inner vision, a perception that perhaps allowed him to grasp the true nature of the encroaching rot. This blind swordsman, through a combination of his extraordinary martial prowess and an unknown, perhaps inherent power, confronted the nascent influence of the outer god of rot. This was not a physical battle in the conventional sense, as an outer god does not possess a corporeal form in the same way a demigod or a beast might. Instead, it was a clash of wills, a struggle against a pervasive, spiritual, and biological infection that threatened to engulf the very soul of the lands between. The details of this confrontation are shrouded in myth, whispered tales of a warrior who moved with impossible grace, whose blade, though perhaps mundane in its material, was imbued with a force capable of repelling the unholy. Some legends suggest he possessed a connection to a different, perhaps benevolent, outer god, or that his blindness granted him immunity to the rot's mind bending influence. Whatever the source of his power, his actions were decisive. Through this immense skill and this unknown power, the blind swordsman successfully sealed away the outer god of Rot. This was not an act of destruction, for an outer god cannot be truly slain in the conventional sense, but rather an act of containment, a cosmic imprisonment. The sealing prevented the outer god of Rot's full manifestation within the lands between, averting its complete dominion over the nascent world. Had the swordsman failed, the lands between would have been transformed into a grotesque, festering wasteland, a monument to decay, long before the Erdtree ever cast its golden shadow. The sealing was a monumental achievement, a heroic act that safeguarded the future of the lands between, though its full significance would only become apparent millennia later. The location of this sealing, too, is lost to time, though some scholars speculate it may have been deep within the earth, in forgotten catacombs, or perhaps even in a dimension adjacent to the physical world, a prison built of arcane power and sheer will. However, even such a profound act of sealing could not entirely purge the influence of an outer god. Despite being sealed, fragments of the outer god of Rot's power, like virulent spores cast from a dying bloom, persisted in the worlds. These lingering remnants coalesced into what would become known as the Scarlet Rot, a dreaded affliction that would plague the lands between for ages to come. The Scarlet Rot was, and remains, a living manifestation of the outer god's essence, a biological weapon that causes decay, madness, and a slow, agonizing death. It is a disease that eats away at flesh, mind, and spirit, turning its victims into grotesque, fungal horrors, or leaving them as withered husks. Its touch can transform vibrant landscapes into blighted swamps where scarlet flowers bloom with an unnatural, sickening beauty, and the air itself is thick with miasma. Its persistence is a constant reminder of the outer god's enduring presence, a threat always lurking beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to break free from its ancient prison. The Scarlet Rot became a dreaded affliction, a silent killer that spread through the land, affecting animals, plants, and sentient beings alike. Its victims often suffered horrific transformations, their bodies sprouting fungal growths, their minds succumbing to a maddening delirium. Entire regions were rendered uninhabitable, becoming zones of perpetual decay. It was a disease without a cure, a slow, agonizing descent into oblivion, a testament to the malevolent power it represented. The fear of the Scarlet Rot became ingrained in the collective consciousness of the lands between, a primal dread of a fate worse than death. It was a constant, insidious threat, a dark undercurrent to the unfolding history of the world. Millennia later, during the age of the Erdtree, a period of relative peace and prosperity under the Golden Order, the shadow of the outer god of Rot would once again loom large. It was during this era that Marika, the Eternal Queen, and Radagon, her second consort, and as we will explore later, her other half, gave birth to Millennia, an Empyrean. Empyreans are beings chosen by the two fingers, destined to become a god, a vessel for an outer god. Millennia, however, was born with a curse, a direct consequence of the lingering power of the sealed outer god of Rot. She was born afflicted with the Scarlet Rot, a disease that would define her existence and shape the destiny of the lands between in ways no one could have foreseen. This birth, a tragic irony in a golden age, marked a critical turning point, a reemergence of the ancient threat, now embodied in one of the most powerful figures of the age. The ancient sealing, though effective for millennia, had not eradicated the rot, only contained it, and its reemergence in millennia would set the stage for one of the most devastating conflicts in the history of the lands between. Millennia, Blade of Miquella, was not merely exposed to the scarlet rot, a virulent disease that corrupts flesh and landscape alike, but was born with Erdtree. This was no mere infection, but a direct manifestation of the sealed outer god of rot's power, coursing through her very veins from the moment of her emergence. Her twin brother, the Empyrean Miquella, a figure of immense power and intellect, renowned for his ability to compel affection and his relentless pursuit of a cure for all afflictions, dedicated his considerable efforts to alleviating her suffering. He crafted the Erdtree, a colossal sacred tree intended to absorb and purify the rot, and even developed the unalloyed gold needle, a miraculous artifact designed to ward off the influence of outer gods. Yet despite his unparalleled devotion and profound magical prowess, all his attempts to cure millennia of the scarlet rot proved tragically futile. The rot was too deeply ingrained, too intrinsic to her being, a constant gnawing presence that defied even Miquella's extraordinary will. Millennia's affliction carried a terrifying prophecy. She was destined to become the complete vessel for the outer god of rot's return, a living conduit through which the ancient malevolent entity would finally break free from its imprisonment. Her very existence was a ticking clock, each passing moment bringing the lands between closer to a horrifying transformation. This grim fate loomed over her, a constant shadow, even as she grew into a formidable warrior, training under the tutelage of the blind swordsman, the clean-wrought knight Finley, who would later carry her unconscious form thousands of miles back to the Erdtree after her fateful battle. Then came the Shattering, a cataclysmic war that tore the lands between asunder, following the destruction of the Elden Ring. In this chaotic era, millennia, driven by a deep sense of duty and perhaps a desperate hope for Miquella's return, engaged in a devastating battle with Star Scourge Radahn in Caelid. Radahn, a demigod of immense physical might and mastery over gravity magic, had halted the stars themselves, preventing the fate of the lands between from progressing. Their clash was not merely a fight for dominance, but a struggle with profound cosmic implications. The battlefield of Caelid, already a desolate landscape, became the stage for an encounter of unprecedented, destructive power. As the battle raged, Millennia found herself pushed to the brink of defeat. Radahn's overwhelming strength and relentless assaults battered her, threatening to extinguish her life and, by extension, the fragile containment of the outer god within her. In a moment of sheer desperation, facing imminent annihilation, Millennia unleashed the full, unbridled power of the scarlet rot that had been festering within her since birth. This cataclysmic act, known as her first bloom, was not a controlled release, but an explosion of pure, unadulterated rot. The consequences were immediate and apocalyptic. Caelid, already scarred by war, was transformed into a grotesque, blighted wasteland, its very earth and sky saturated with the virulent contagion. The rot consumed everything, turning flora into grotesque fungi and fauna into maddened, disease-ridden monstrosities. Radahn, though a demigod of immense fortitude, was not immune to its effects. He was utterly overwhelmed, his mind shattered and his body corrupted, though miraculously he did not perish immediately, instead succumbing to a slow, agonizing decay that left him a husk of his former self, doomed to wander the wastes of Kaled in a state of perpetual madness. This first bloom was a terrifying harbinger of what was to come. Millennia's body, already a vessel for the outer god, became a conduit for its raw power, each subsequent bloom bringing the entity closer to complete manifestation. The lore reveals that these blooms were not voluntary acts of aggression, but rather involuntary, catastrophic releases of the rot, triggered by extreme duress and near death experiences. Each time Millennia was pushed to her absolute limit, the outer god within her would surge, forcing a release of its devastating power, a desperate self preservation mechanism that simultaneously threatened the entire world. These repeated blooms of rot, though saving Millennia's life in the short term, threatened to unleash the outer god's full, unconstrained power upon the entirety of the lands between. The delicate balance maintained by the ancient seal was eroding with each eruption. Each bloom, therefore, was a step closer to the outer god of rot, breaking its ancient seal and fully manifesting in the world. The implications were dire. A complete manifestation would mean the irreversible transformation of the lands between into a realm of perpetual decay, a living testament to the outer god's insatiable hunger for corruption. The very fabric of life, as understood by the inhabitants, would be irrevocably altered, replaced by a grotesque, rotting imitation. Millennia, the valiant warrior, was thus a tragic figure, her very existence a constant struggle against an inner demon, a living weapon whose every desperate act of self-preservation brought the world closer to its blighted end. Her journey and the efforts of those who sought to contain or cure her underscored the terrifying power of the outer gods and their relentless influence on the fate of the lands between. The rot, in its insidious spread, was not merely a disease, but a testament to a cosmic entity's patient, destructive will, slowly but surely unraveling the very order of the world. As the outer god of rot began its insidious spread across the lands between, a different cosmic influence was already charting the destinies of another powerful family, far removed from the Scarlet Blight. We now move into the ancient era, spanning through to the Shattering, a period defined by the celestial dance of the dark moon and the stars. This era marks a profound shift in the cosmic tapestry as new powers emerge and ancient civilizations rise and fall under the watchful cold gaze of the heavens. At the heart of this celestial narrative is the dark moon itself, not merely a celestial body, but an outer god, an incomprehensible cosmic entity, residing beyond the known universe, much like the greater will or the formless mother. This particular outer god is intrinsically linked to fate, to destiny, and to the very fabric of cosmic influence. Its power, subtle yet profound, began to guide the Carian royal family, a lineage of powerful sorcerers and rulers who would eventually come to dominate a significant portion of the lands between. The Dark Moon's influence wasn't a direct command or imposition, but rather a subtle, almost gravitational pull, shaping their understanding of the cosmos and empowering their unique brand of sorcery. Before the Carian royal family fully embraced the Dark Moon, the very foundation of their magical prowess was laid by earlier seekers of cosmic truth. It was during this ancient epoch that the primeval current, a primordial fundamental form of sorcery, was first discovered. Imagine, if you will, the raw, untamed energy of creation itself, distilled into a magical discipline. This wasn't the refined, structured incantations of later eras, but a wild, potent, and often dangerous power. Early astrologers and scholars, gazing at the stars from their rudimentary observatories, began to decipher the intricate patterns of the cosmos, recognizing that these celestial movements were not just random occurrences, but manifestations of a deeper, underlying magical energy. They studied the flow of starlight, the gravitational pull of distant nebulae, and the subtle shifts in the cosmic currents, gradually learning to harness this primeval current. Their understanding was rudimentary, perhaps, but it was the first step towards a truly cosmic sorcery, a magic that drew its power not from the earth or from divine grace, but from the boundless expanse of space itself. These early practitioners, often solitary and reclusive, laid the groundwork for the more advanced forms of sorcery that would later define the Carian legacy. While the surface world was still grappling with nascent civilizations and the early stirrings of the Erdtree, deep beneath the earth, another civilization was flourishing, one entirely devoted to the celestial. The eternal city of Nokron, and later its sister city, Noxtella, were established in the vast, subterranean caverns of the lands between. The inhabitants of these cities, known as the Nox, were a distinct people, their skin often described as silver or pale, their eyes reflecting the starlight that filtered down through colossal chasms. Unlike the surface dwellers, who increasingly turned their gaze towards the golden light of the Erdtree and the Greater Will, the Nox maintained an unwavering devotion to the stars, and more specifically, to the dark moon. Their cities were architectural marvels, carved from rock and adorned with intricate celestial motifs, their streets lit by the ethereal glow of artificial stars and phosphorescent fungi. Their culture revolved around astronomical observation, the interpretation of cosmic omens, and the development of unique forms of magic derived from their stellar worship. The Nox, however, were not content with merely observing the cosmos. They were innovators, driven by a profound desire to defy the natural order, particularly the dictates of the Greater Will. The Greater Will, as we've discussed, sought to impose a rigid, immutable order upon the lands between, dictating the very nature of life and death, and condemning any deviation from its established norms. The Nox, with their reverence for the fluid, ever-changing nature of the cosmos, found this restrictive. In their defiance, they began to create artificial life forms, a direct challenge to the Greater Will's dominion over creation. Their most famous creations were the mimic tears, sentient beings capable of perfectly imitating any form they encountered. These weren't mere constructs, they possessed a degree of consciousness and adaptability that bordered on true life, a terrifying prospect for a cosmic entity that demanded singular control over all sentient existence. Beyond the mimic tears, they also fashioned other artificial beings, often made of silver, their forms fluid and adaptable, reflecting the cosmic mutability they revered. This act of creation, of forging life outside the Greater Will's purview, was a profound act of rebellion, a declaration of their independence from its golden tyranny. This defiance, however, came at a steep price. The Nox, emboldened by their successes in artificial life, harbored an even grander ambition to create a new Elden Lord. The Elden Lord, as you know, is the consort of the Empyrean who presides over the Elden Ring, and thus the ruler of the lands between. The Greater Will, through its chosen Empyreans, dictated who could ascend to this position. The Nox, seeking to circumvent this divine decree, attempted to forge their own Elden Lord from silver, the very material that formed the basis of many of their artificial creations. This was an audacious act, an attempt to usurp the Greater Will's authority over the very pinnacle of power in the lands between. The details of this attempt are shrouded in mystery, but its consequences are starkly clear. The greater will, enraged by this ultimate act of defiance, brought its immense power to bear upon the eternal cities. The Nox were utterly defeated, their civilization shattered, and their magnificent cities, Nokron and Noxtella, were sealed away deep underground, condemned to eternal darkness and isolation. The sealing wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a cosmic punishment, a declaration that their hubris would forever be confined to the depths, their light extinguished for their transgression. Despite the downfall of the Nox, the influence of the stars and the dark moon continued to resonate across the lands between, finding a new, equally powerful conduit in the Carrion royal family. It was within this lineage that full moon sorcery was developed and mastered. This unique form of magic drew its power directly from the dark moon, channeling its cold, ethereal light into devastating spells. Unlike the primeval current, which was raw and untamed, full moon sorcery was refined, elegant, and incredibly potent. It manifested as shimmering, cerulean arcs of energy, gravitational distortions, and the iconic spectral full moon that could be summoned to obliterate foes. The Carrion royal family, through generations of dedicated study and practice, became unparalleled masters of this sorcery, their power rivaling, and in some cases, even exceeding, the Golden Order's incantations. Their castles, particularly the majestic Raya Lucarian Academy, became centers of astrological study and magical research, their libraries filled with ancient texts detailing the celestial mechanics and the secrets of the dark moon. This lineage of powerful sorcerers culminated in the figure of Renala, Queen of the Full Moon. Renala was not merely a practitioner of full moon sorcery, she was its living embodiment. Her connection to the dark moon was profound, almost symbiotic. She became a powerful sorceress, her mastery of lunar magic unmatched, and a formidable leader of the Carrion royal family. Under her reign, the Carrion Academy flourished, attracting scholars and mages from across the lands between. Her presence was a beacon of lunar power, her very being intertwined with the cosmic entity that guided her family. Her power was so immense that she could even rebirth individuals, albeit imperfectly, a testament to her profound understanding of life and magic, echoing the creative ambitions of the Nox, but achieved through a different, more refined path. It was into this lineage, steeped in lunar power and cosmic influence, that Rani the Witch was born, an Empyrean chosen by a mysterious outer god to potentially become a vessel for the Elden Ring. Rani was the daughter of Renala and Radagon, the latter of whom would later become Marika's second consort. This dual parentage imbued Rani with a unique heritage, combining the golden lineage of the Erdtree with the ancient lunar power of the Carrion royal family. Consequently, Rani inherited a strong innate connection to the dark moon, a connection that would profoundly shape her destiny and her pivotal role in the unfolding narrative of the lands between. Her birth marked a significant point in this cosmic timeline, as the threads of lunar magic and divine destiny began to intertwine in a single, enigmatic figure. Rani, however, harbored a profound disquiet regarding her designated role. As an Empyrean, she was inherently marked as a potential vessel for an outer god, specifically the Greater Will, the cosmic entity that had established the Golden Order in the lands between. This destiny, to become a living conduit for a power she perceived as oppressive and controlling, was anathema to her. Rani yearned for true freedom, not just for herself, but for all the inhabitants of the lands between. believing that their fate should not be dictated by an external, unseen force. Her vision was not one of subservience, but of self determination, a realm guided by the wisdom of the stars rather than the dictates of a distant, unseen deity. This burgeoning desire for liberation led her to actively seek a path to sever her ties with the greater will and usher in an age of stars, an era where the influence of outer gods would be diminished and individuals would chart their own course, guided by the cosmic dance of the night sky. It was during this period of intense introspection and burgeoning rebellion that Rani began to perceive a different kind of cosmic guidance, one that resonated with her desire for autonomy. The dark moon, unlike the omnipresent, often stifling influence of the greater will, the dark moon offered a more subtle, yet profoundly powerful form of insight. This celestial body, often associated with mystery, magic, and the hidden truths of the cosmos, presented itself as a potential counterforce to the established Golden Order. Rani, already a formidable sorceress, delved deeper into the esoteric lore surrounding the Dark Moon, recognizing its potential to defy the rigid doctrines of the Golden Order and the pervasive influence of the Greater Will. The Dark Moon, in her understanding, represented a path to true liberation, a way to break free from the predetermined narrative imposed upon her by her Empyrean status. This realization solidified her resolve and set her on a dangerous yet ultimately transformative trajectory. With her resolve hardened and her path illuminated by the enigmatic glow of the dark moon, Rani began to meticulously plot her escape from the clutches of the greater will. Her Empyrean flesh, the very vessel that made her a candidate for divine ascension under the greater will, became a burden, a symbol of her predetermined fate. To truly break free, she understood, she would need to discard this physical form, to shed the very essence that bound her to the greater will's grand design. This radical notion to willingly abandon her physical body was not born of desperation, but of strategic brilliance. By severing herself from her Empyrean flesh, she believed she could become something else entirely, an entity unbound by the dictates of the greater will, free to pursue her own cosmic vision. This audacious plan would culminate in one of the most pivotal and devastating events in the history of the lands between, the Night of Black Knives. To execute her daring plan, Rani required a specifically potent instrument, a fragment of the Rune of Death. This ancient, forbidden rune, once sealed away by Marika herself, held the power to inflict true death, a power that had been largely absent from the lands between since its removal from the Elden Ring. Rani, through means yet shrouded in mystery, managed to enlist the aid of the Black Knife Assassins, a shadowy group of Numen women, skilled in stealth and wielding blades imbued with the power of the Rune of Death. These assassins, likely motivated by their own grievances against the Golden Order, or perhaps swayed by Rani's compelling vision, became the instruments of her rebellion. At Rani's behest, they infiltrated the hidden sanctums where the Rune of Death was kept, successfully stealing a crucial fragment. This act, a direct defiance of Marika's decree and the Golden Order, signaled the true beginning of Rani's war against her predetermined fate. The Night of Black Knives was a meticulously orchestrated event, a convergence of cosmic ambition and mortal betrayal. Rani's plan was twofold, designed to achieve both her personal liberation and to irrevocably alter the course of the lands between. On that fateful night, the Black Knife Assassins, armed with the stolen fragment of the Rune of Death, launched a coordinated strike. Their primary target, At Rani's command was Godwyn the Golden, the firstborn demigod child of Marika and Godfrey, revered and beloved throughout the lands between. The assassins, utilizing the power of the stolen rune of death, inflicted a wound upon Godwyn that killed his soul, yet left his body physically intact. This unprecedented form of death, a soul death without a corresponding bodily demise, would have profound and unsettling consequences for the lands between, giving rise to the unsettling phenomenon of those who live in death. Simultaneously and crucially, Rani orchestrated the death of her own Empyrean body. This was not a suicide in the conventional sense, but a deliberate act of self-severance, a ritualistic discarding of her physical form to escape the greater will's control. The exact mechanism of her body's demise remains a subject of speculation, but it is understood that the stolen fragment of the rune of death played a vital role in this process as well. By inflicting a death that targeted only her physical form, Rani's soul was freed, able to inhabit a new, doll-like body, a vessel of her own choosing, unbound by the expectations and limitations of her Empyrean lineage. This dual act, the soul death of Godwyn and the body death of Rani, was the catalyst for the shattering, the cataclysmic event that would plunge the lands between into an era of war and despair. The death of Godwyn, the beloved demigod, ignited the fury of the remaining demigods, leading to a brutal war over the fractured Elden Ring. Rani, now operating from the shadows in her new form, had successfully broken free, but at a terrible cost, forever altering the destiny of the lands between and setting the stage for the Tarnished's arrival. The consequences of her actions, driven by a desire for cosmic freedom, would reverberate through every corner of the realm, shaping its future in ways no one could have foreseen. Transitioning from the cosmic ballet of the dark moon and the stars, we now descend into a more grounded, yet equally profound aspect of existence in the lands between, one that predates even the Golden Order's ascendance. Our timeline now brings us squarely into this ancient era, stretching all the way to the cataclysmic event known as the Shattering, as we explore the intricate and often terrifying relationship between the twin bird and death. Long before the Erdtree cast its golden shadow across the lands between, before Marika's reign and the establishment of the Golden Order with its unique philosophy on life and death, there existed a different, perhaps more fundamental, understanding of mortality. This understanding was embodied by an entity known as the Pyomu, an outer god whose influence permeated the very fabric of existence. The twin bird is not merely an abstract concept, but a tangible, albeit ethereal force, worshipped by ancient civilizations, most notably the death birds. These spectral avian creatures, often encountered as terrifying bosses in the lands between, are not just monsters, but the ancient guardians and priests of the twin bird. Their very presence speaks of a time when death was viewed not as an end, but as an integral part of a grander cyclical process. The twin bird's dominion over death and the afterlife is starkly contrasted with the Golden Order's later attempts to control and contain death. While the Golden Order sought to eliminate destined death, viewing it as an aberration, the twin bird embraced it as a natural, inevitable, and even necessary component of existence. This outer god represents a cycle of death and rebirth, a continuous flow of souls returning to the earth and emerging anew, albeit in different forms. This ancient perspective suggests a world where mortality was accepted, even revered, as a pathway to renewal. The death birds, In their funerary rites and their role as overseers of the passage of souls, ensured that this cycle was maintained. They were the spiritual custodians of the deceased, guiding them through the transition and ensuring their eventual return. Their rituals, though grim to modern eyes, were essential for the spiritual health of the ancient world. The most potent manifestation of the twin bird's power and the sacred flame of the death birds is the ghost flame. This spectral, blue-hued fire is not merely a magical effect. It is the very essence of the twin bird's influence, a chilling yet beautiful representation of death and the afterlife. Unlike the Erdtree's golden grace, which promotes life and rebirth within its own strictures, Ghost Flame embodies the raw, untamed power of mortality. It consumes, but it also purifies, stripping away the ephemeral to reveal the eternal. The Deathbirds wield this flame in their attacks, imbuing their weapons and spells with its chilling power, a constant reminder of their allegiance to the twin bird. The presence of ghost flame in various ancient catacombs and burial grounds further solidifies its connection to ancestral death rites, suggesting that the flame was used to guide or perhaps even consume the spirits of the departed, facilitating their journey through the twin bird's cycle. Intriguingly, the influence of the twin bird extends even to more recent historical figures, specifically touching upon the very concept of a Kingskitsunja god of death. While the Golden Order sought to suppress all forms of death, the game's lore hints at a powerful entity, possibly a manifestation or aspect of the twin bird's power, specifically concerning the death of gods and demigods. This god of death is often alluded to as Marika's shadow, a dark counterpart to her divine authority. The existence of such a powerful entity suggests that even the gods themselves are not immune to the twin bird's pervasive reach. It implies that while the twin bird governs the death of mortals, this god of death might be responsible for the demise of divine beings, ensuring that even the most powerful entities eventually return to the cycle. This connection is profoundly significant, as it suggests that the twin bird's influence is not merely confined to the ancient past or to lesser beings, but extends to the very pinnacle of power in the lands between. The notion of a god of death, specifically for divine beings, highlights the twin bird's comprehensive dominion over all forms of mortality, suggesting a hierarchy of death processes that it oversees. The most concrete link between the twin bird's ancient power and the more recent history of the lands between lies in the Skilhut rune of death. Once an integral part of the mystical artifact known as the Elden ring, the rune of death represented the very concept of destined death, the inevitable and true end of all things. However, Marika, in her quest to establish the Golden Order and create a world free from the cycle of death and rebirth as understood by the twin bird, sealed away this powerful rune. She entrusted its guardianship to her shadow, Malekith, the Black Blade, binding him with an oath to prevent destined death from ever returning to the lands between. This act was a pivotal moment, a deliberate attempt to sever the connection to the twin bird's ancient order and impose a new, artificial reality. By removing the rune of death, Marika sought to halt the natural cycle, to prevent souls from truly departing, and instead bind them to the Erdtree, creating a system of perpetual life and rebirth within her own dominion. This action, however, had unforeseen consequences, leading to the emergence of those who live in death and a perversion of the natural order that the twin bird once governed. Marika's sealing of the rune of death was not just a political or religious act. It was a cosmic intervention, a direct challenge to the ancient authority of the twin bird, an attempt to rewrite the fundamental laws of existence. The fact that the Rune of Death was once a part of the Elden Ring itself underscores the profound importance of death in the original cosmic order, an importance that Marika actively sought to diminish. The twin bird, through its ancient worships and its manifestation as the ghost flame, represents this primordial understanding of death, a concept fundamentally at odds with the Golden Order's manufactured eternity. The echoes of the twin bird's influence, even after the Rune of Death was sealed, continued to resonate throughout the lands between, manifesting in the spectral presence of the death birds and the lingering power of ghost flame, a constant reminder of the true, unyielding nature of mortality that Marika so desperately tried to suppress. This struggle between the ancient, cyclical view of death, championed by the twin bird, and the Golden Order's imposed stasis, forms a crucial undercurrent throughout the history of the lands between, shaping events and driving conflicts for millennia. The consequences of Marika's actions and the lingering power of the twin bird would eventually lead to the return of destined death, albeit in a chaotic and destructive manner, highlighting the futility of attempting to defy the fundamental forces of the cosmos. The twin bird, though seemingly absent from the forefront of the Golden Order's narratives, remained a silent, powerful observer, its ancient influence subtly guiding the inevitable return of the very concept Marika sought to erase. With the Golden Order firmly established, Queen Marika, in her boundless ambition and perhaps a touch of fear, sought to solidify her dominion over the very cycle of life and death. Her motivation, though never explicitly stated in ancient texts, appears to have been a desire to establish an age of eternal life, or at least a tightly controlled form of immortality, for her loyal subjects and, crucially, for herself and her demigod children. To achieve this, she made the momentous decision to seal away the Rune of Death, the very concept of true, permanent cessation of existence. This was not a minor alteration, but a fundamental reshaping of the natural order of the lands between. To ensure the Rune of Death, sometimes referred to as destined death, remained contained, Marika entrusted its guardianship to her shadow, Malekith, the Black Blade. This was no ordinary task. Malekith, a formidable beastman of unparalleled loyalty and power, was not merely to guard the rune in some hidden vault. Instead, in an act of profound sacrifice and unwavering devotion, he bound the Rune of Death within his own flesh. This act transformed him, imbuing him with immense power, but also burdening him with an eternal vigil. His very being became a prison for the concept of true death, a living lock on the ultimate end. The sealing of the Rune of Death had immediate and profound consequences for the lands between. With destined death locked away, the natural cycle of life and death was fundamentally altered. True death, as it had been known since time immemorial, effectively ceased to exist. When individuals perished, their souls no longer passed into a final, irreversible oblivion. Instead, they were drawn back to the Erdtree, the colossal golden tree that stood at the heart of the lands between, a symbol of the Golden Order's power and influence. This return to the Erdtree was not a true resurrection in the sense of returning to their former bodies, but rather a reabsorption, a recycling of spiritual essence. The bodies of the deceased would return to the earth, but their souls would nourish the Erdtree, contributing to its growth and the continued vitality of the Golden Order. This created a peculiar form of immortality, where life continued in a cyclical fashion, albeit without the finality that once defined it. It was a world where death was merely a detour, a temporary passage back to the source of all life under the Erdtree's golden boughs. This seemingly benevolent system, however, was not without its discontents and hidden vulnerabilities. As the ancient era transitioned into the period leading up to the shattering, a new player emerged from the shadows, seeking to unravel Marika's carefully constructed order. Rani the Witch, a demigod daughter of Radagon and Renala, harbored her own ambitions, rejecting the fate imposed upon her by the greater will and its golden dominion. Driven by a desire to forge a new age, an age of stars, she orchestrated a daring and devastating plot. She conspired with a faction of the Black Knife Assassins, shadowy figures known for their swiftness and deadly blades. These assassins, often depicted as female Numen, an ancient race with close ties to Marika herself, were instrumental in Rani's scheme. Under Rani's guidance, the Black Knife Assassins undertook the impossible. They stole a fragment of the Rune of Death. This was no easy feat, requiring a level of stealth, cunning, and raw power that spoke volumes about Rani's influence and the assassins' capabilities. The precise method of their infiltration and extraction from Malekith's very being remains shrouded in mystery, a testament to the secrecy of the plot. Perhaps it was a moment of vulnerability, a lapse in Malekith's eternal vigil, or perhaps a more insidious form of magic was employed. Regardless of the how, the fact remained: a piece of destined death, once thought irrevocably bound, was now loose in the lands between. The moment the Rune of Death was stolen, its power, long suppressed, began to unleash destined death upon the lands between, with terrifying consequences. It was as if a dam had burst, and the long-held floodwaters of true mortality surged forth. This wasn't a gradual return to the old ways, but a violent eruption, a chaotic reintroduction of the ultimate end. The fragment of the Rune of Death, though small, carried immense power, enough to bypass the Erdtree's reabsorption cycle and inflict true, irreversible death. The culmination of this audacious plot was the infamous Night of the Black Knives. On this fateful night, the Black Knife Assassins, wielding their blades imbued with the stolen fragment of destined death, struck with merciless precision. Their primary target, Godwyn the Golden, Marika's firstborn son and a beloved demigod, renowned for his strength and charisma. The assassin's blades, supernaturally sharp and imbued with the power of true death, pierced Godwyn's flesh, not merely ending his life, but slaying his very soul. This was a death unlike any seen since the sealing of the Rune of Death. His soul, instead of returning to the Erdtree, was utterly destroyed, extinguished from existence. Godwyn the Golden became the first demigod to truly die, a stark and brutal demonstration of the Rune of Death's unleashed power. Yet, in a macabre twist of fate, Godwyn's body, though utterly devoid of a soul, continued to live. This paradoxical existence, a soulless husk animated by some lingering, corrupted life force, became a horrifying testament to the incomplete nature of the Night of the Black Knives. While his soul was slain, his body was not entirely eradicated. This soulless form, a grotesque mockery of his former glory, became known as the Prince of Death. From his corrupted remains, a blight began to spread across the lands between, a fungal growth known as deathroot. This insidious affliction permeated the earth, infecting trees, creatures, and even the very fabric of reality, further blurring the lines between life and death. The presence of Deathroot was a constant creeping reminder of Godwin's tragic fate and the unleashed power of destined death. It was a tangible manifestation of the Golden Order's unraveling, a dark stain on Marika's once pristine age of immortality. The events of the Night of the Black Knives and the subsequent corruption brought about by Godwin's soulless existence served as a brutal precursor to the ultimate collapse of the Golden Order. The shattering of the Elden Ring itself, a cataclysmic event that followed these tragedies, further destabilized the natural order of life and death. The Elden Ring, the physical manifestation of the Golden Order's laws, was fractured into great runes, scattering its power and leaving the lands between in chaos. This fracturing exacerbated the influence of destined death. With the Elden Ring broken, the Erdtree's power to reclaim souls was weakened, and the cycle of returning to its boughs became even more erratic and corrupted. The lands between devolved into a realm where true death, once sealed away, now reigned supreme in its chaotic, untamed form, leaving behind a world scarred by war, decay, and the ever-present shadow of the Prince of Death. The twin bird, an ancient symbol of life and death, now found its delicate balance utterly shattered, its ancient wisdom overshadowed by the grim reality of a world grappling with a death it could no longer comprehend or control. From the primordial crucible of the formless mother's influence, through the cosmic dance of the greater will and its Empyrean agents, to the tragic cycle of the twin bird and the inescapable grip of death, we have journeyed through the intricate tapestry of Elden Ring's outer gods. Their silent machinations and overt interventions have shaped the very fabric of the lands between, dictating the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of demigods, and the eternal struggle for dominion. This comprehensive chronology reveals a universe perpetually in flux, a grand stage upon which cosmic entities vie for power, their wills etched into the very essence of existence. And that is the complete Every Elden Ring DLC Outer Gods Explained timeline.